The conference championships are here, and with it, the final multi-game slate of this NFL season. I'm going to be breaking it down as usual, going position by position, starting with quarterbacks, then running backs, receivers, tight ends, and defenses. I'll be looking at defensive matchups, usage trends, coach speak, all that good stuff, any edge we can find. While you're coming in, please do like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're not already subscribed. And of course, if you want to stay in touch after the NFL season, there is a Flaniverse Discord. It's free to join. There's a link in the description of this video if you're interested in checking it out. I will, of course, be using Run the Sims for this video. If you want to check out Run the Sims and you haven't already done so, you can get 50% off your first payment on any NFL product at Run the Sims using promo code NEIL. That's NEIL. At quarterback, we have Matthew Stafford at 6,300, projected for 9% ownership. Drake May at 6,000, projected for 53% ownership. Sam Darnold, 5,500, projected for 21% ownership. And Jarrett Stidham is 4,500, projected for 17% ownership. I will note the projected ownership that we're using right now at Run the Sims is more extreme than I have seen elsewhere, although it is directionally accurate, with Drake May being the highest projected ownership, Matthew Stafford being the lowest. This is kind of the most extreme that I've seen anywhere. I think typically Matthew Stafford closer to 20% ownership, Drake May, in the 35 to 40% ownership range. And that will change the projections, how much you get of them, pretty significantly if the ownership changes. So just wanted to note that the projected ownership that I'm using right now at Run the Sims will give me very different results than if I use the projected ownership that you see other places. In terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed per game to the quarterback position over the last 5 weeks, the Seahawks have the 16th best matchup, Rams have the 17th best matchup, Patriots have the 19th best matchup, and then the Broncos have the third worst matchup for quarterbacks. So none of them particularly great matchups. All of them show up as negatives relative to a neutral matchup, but it's a particularly tough one for the Broncos and Jarrett Stidham. Before continuing to talk about the quarterbacks, I decided to just rerun the Sims after changing their projected ownership. So you see the projected ownership here on the left is the ownership that Run the Sims is using. I changed it to 35% for Drake May, 25% for Sam Darnold, 20% for Matthew Stafford, and 20% for Jarrett Stidham to see what the Sims would give me using ownership that I think is probably a little bit closer to what it's going to be than it is right now. I wouldn't be surprised to see Jarrett Stidham come in a little bit lower than 20%, but I think that's at least a little bit closer to what I expect the ownership to finally come in at on Sunday. And first of all, I'll just show you what I got in the Sims using the Run the Sims ownership. So with Drake May projected for 53% ownership, I still got to 21%. Sam Darnold at 21%, I got to 27%. Matthew Stafford at 9% ownership, I got to 46%. And then Jarrett Stidham at 17% projected ownership, I got to 5%. After I changed the projected ownership, it changed pretty drastically what I got as a result. So Drake May, I'm now up to 30% using 35% projected ownership. Sam Darnold, I'm a little bit above the field, getting to 29% at 25% projected ownership. Matthew Stafford, even at 20% projected ownership, still got to 36%. And then Jarrett Stidham, I'm still getting to a little bit, but well under the field at 5%. And honestly, after adjusting the ownership to closer to where I want it to be, I got basically exactly what I want. I think if Matthew Stafford comes in at lower ownership than Drake May and Sam Darnold, I want to have well above the field on Matthew Stafford. So this 36% looks great. Still getting to a lot of Drake May. Citing my friend Jake Tribby here, Drake May has excelled even in tough matchups as a fantasy producer so far this year. Highly recommend checking out Jake's article at Fantasy Points. If you haven't already done so, you can use promo code Flannel to get 15% off at Fantasy Points. They've reduced their prices. Check it out if you haven't already done so. Great stuff there from Jake. But Drake May producing well even in tough matchups. Sam Darnold, I'm a little bit torn on because he does have one of the better matchups. Not a great matchup, again, pretty middling against the Rams. But Sam Darnold, we saw him last year, and I'm biased because I'm a Vikings fan, but we watched him last year kind of fall apart when things matter the most, and we haven't really seen him do much in recent weeks either. I mean, last week they beat San Francisco 41-6. Darnold only threw the ball 17 times in that game. I think they might be kind of hiding him a little bit. It's also hard to read what Seattle's trying to do because, again, they won that game 41-6, but he hasn't thrown it 30 times in any of the last 3 games. He reached 34 against the Rams on December 18th, but that was in an overtime game. They just haven't really been leaning on Sam Darnold at the end of the season here. So I don't know. Part of me wants to kind of fade Sam Darnold, but they're also down Zach Charbonnet. Maybe they need to throw the ball a little bit more than usual. So if he does come in at 25% ownership, I think I probably just do what the Sims are doing, and I'll be with maybe a little bit above the field on Sam Darnold. Stafford, as I said, is the bigger priority. If he comes in as low owned as he's being projected, again, he's being projected for usually under 20% ownership. Most places right now, I've seen him as high as 25%. Again, I used 20% here, and I got to 36%. It's a tough matchup with Seattle, but it's actually not that much tougher than the matchup for Darnold, at least in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points over the last 5 weeks. So all things considered, I want to be above weight on Stafford. I just believe in that coaching staff, that offense in general. So I think it makes sense to be above weight on Stafford. And then Jarrett Stidham, the best case you can make for Jarrett Stidham is the price. It's a tough matchup. He's coming in out of nowhere, hasn't been playing at all this year. Now he has to start a game in the playoffs against the Patriots. I'm not expecting a ton from Stidham here, but he's only 4,500. There are some really nice pay-ups on the slate. So I think he's in play, not going to be a full fade for me, but I'm underweight even at his 17%, or actually I used 20% here, but I only got to 5%. I think I'm okay with that. I'd rather lean on the other 3 quarterbacks. One last thing I want to note is that Sam Darnold has been dealing with an oblique injury since before their game last week against the 49ers. There was some question if he was going to be able to play before that game. So this is kind of an old quote. It's from January 16th. Head coach Mike McDonald was asked whether the injury could limit Darnold in any way. He said, well, yeah, that's a possibility. I think right now he's confident that he's going to be able to do his thing at 100%, and we are too. But with these things, something could happen between now and then, or something could happen in game. So kind of just have to roll with it. And then this week on the 21st, head coach Mike McDonald said, Sam Darnold continues to get better. He's not going to be a full go the whole week. We have a plan. The next day he said, we're still on the plan with Sam Darnold. He's feeling good. He feels better than he did going into last week's game, and he showed that he could throw then. And on the 22nd, Clint Kubiak said, Sam Darnold looks healthy to me. So all indications are that Sam Darnold probably fine, but I did think it was, interesting that they acknowledged that he could re-aggravate the injury at any time, could happen in game. So there is maybe a little bit of heightened risk for Sam Darnold with that oblique still kind of bothering him, but he's off the injury report, so it's not something that I'm planning on factoring in for the main slate. Maybe on the showdown slate I'll play a little bit less of Darnold, but for the full 2-game slate I don't think I'm going to adjust Darnold based on the oblique injury. At running back, Kyren Williams is 6,500, projected for 42% ownership. Kenneth Walker, 6,200, projected for 78% ownership. Ramondre Stevenson, 6,000, projected for 48% ownership. RJ Harvey, 5,900, projected for 40% ownership. Trevian Henderson, 5,500, projected for 11% ownership. Blake Corum, 5,000, projected for 4% ownership. Jaleel McLaughlin, 4,400, projected for 12.4% ownership. Then you've got Tyler Bidet, Velus Jones, and Adam Prentice, not projected for much ownership at all. 4,200 for Bidet, 4,000 for Jones, 4,000 for Prentice, all projected for sub 1% ownership. As far as the matchups go, schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed over the last 5 weeks to the running back position. The Seahawks have the 16th worst matchup. So it's, just barely below neutral for Kenneth Walker and Seahawks running backs. The Rams have the 10th worst matchup. The Patriots have the 8th worst matchup. And then the Broncos have the 2nd worst matchup of all NFL teams, schedule adjusted over the last 5 weeks. I normally go over pass rate over expectation when I'm talking about quarterbacks, but I didn't here. I'm going to go over it here while I'm going over running backs because it's equally applicable to running backs. So in terms of pass rate over expectation on the season, the Rams rank 3rd, the Broncos rank 4th, the Patriots rank 5th. So 3 in the top 5 in terms of pass rate over expectation. Then a big drop down to the Seahawks ranking 27th. However, I do want to note, I think that could change here this week because we have Jarrett Stidham here for the Broncos instead of Bo Nix. That could change the approach that the Broncos take to this game. Otherwise, maybe it holds closer to where it has been. But I wanted to at least note that it's possible that the Broncos being 4th on the season doesn't really matter when they have a quarterback change here. They might completely change their approach to the game. Starting with the Broncos, we have RJ Harvey at 5,900, projected for 40% ownership. Jaleel McLaughlin at 4,400, projected for 12% ownership. I got to 45% Harvey, 7% Jaleel McLaughlin using these numbers. Now, looking at their first game in the playoffs, we saw just 10 total carries for Broncos running backs, 6 for RJ Harvey, 4 for Jaleel McLaughlin. But then we saw the bigger disparity in the passing game. RJ Harvey was targeted 6 times on 49% route participation. And this is kind of a big point. Again, I want to cite to my friend Jake Tribby, who noted in his article at Fantasy Points, again, highly recommend checking that out. But Jake noted that Jarrett Stidham from 2021 to 2023, including, a handful of starts, like 5 or so starts over that time frame, he targeted running backs 26% of the time. That's a lot, 20% for Bo Nix on the season. So this is, an increase for running back target share if that number holds for Jarrett Stidham here. And, typically in Sean Payton offenses, you do see the running backs get targeted quite a bit. So that could benefit RJ Harvey actually having Jarrett Stidham behind center for the Broncos. And then on top of potentially getting more targets to the running back position, they might just run the ball more with Jarrett Stidham. Shouldn't surprise anybody if we see the Broncos go a little bit run heavier than usual with, Bo Nix being out for this game, Jarrett Stidham starting his first game of the season. You would expect them to be a little bit more conservative throwing the ball if they can, not get behind. They'll probably try to throw the ball more than usual, or at least it's something that is well within the range of outcomes that the Broncos just want to run the ball a lot more now that they have Jarrett Stidham playing his first game at quarterback, first game of the season. So the Broncos might just run the ball more than they have been. So, using the inputs at Run the Sims, we have just I believe 44% rush rate, but I wouldn't be that surprised to see them, closer to a 50% rush rate, just lean on the run more now that Bo Nix is out. So that does make me like both RJ Harvey and Jaleel McLaughlin a bit more. Now, Jaleel McLaughlin in that most recent game had 4 of the 10 carries. So, almost an even split there with RJ Harvey. That isn't really in line with how things have looked, though. Over their last 5 weeks, overall, it's been 61 carries for RJ Harvey to just 24 for Jaleel McLaughlin. So, not really an even split between the two. But if they do run the ball a lot more than usual, maybe they run it 25 times, just seeing, the way they kind of used Jaleel McLaughlin in that last game, maybe he could get to, double-digit carries or so and see a couple targets. So we might see the usage increase for Jaleel McLaughlin as well. So I like RJ Harvey. I think he's, clearly one of the best running back plays on the slate. But I actually think Jaleel McLaughlin is a pretty intriguing play at 12% projected ownership. Also, I think I might increase the rush rate, increase the involvement for the running backs on the Broncos, with Jarrett Stidham at quarterback. So ultimately, I think that I probably do come in overweight on RJ Harvey. I might come in overweight on Jaleel McLaughlin as well, just because this is a slate where I don't think we have a ton of sure things at running back. I think it's, you can see paths to failure for every running back on this slate. I think it's possible that none of them get to, over 12 fantasy points. Now, I think probably 1 or 2 of them do get there, but there are paths to none of these running backs really putting up big fantasy scores, in which case Jaleel McLaughlin at 4,400, if he can get to, 8 fantasy points with a couple receptions and just some yardage, maybe he falls into the end zone. There are paths for Jaleel McLaughlin to, be within striking distance and be the player that you need for his salary, because we do have some nice spend ups as well in Puka Nacua, JSN, etc. So I think Jaleel McLaughlin makes sense as a value here. Now, I do want to note that he has not had an inside the 5 carry over the last 5 weeks. It's been RJ Harvey has gotten 50% of them, Adam Prentice and Tyler Bidet 25% each. No inside the 5 carries over the last 5 games for Jaleel McLaughlin. But I think there are still, ways for Jaleel McLaughlin to pay off his salary. I still think he could, get an inside the 5 carry. Shouldn't surprise anybody if he does. So I do kind of like Jaleel McLaughlin as the cheapest running back I think that I'll play on this slate. I think that he is a decent value here at 4,400. On the Rams, we have Kyren Williams at 6,500, projected for 42% ownership. Blake Corum at 5,000 projected for 4% ownership. I got under the field on Kyren, just 32% exposure, and then a little over the field on Corum. I got to 7% in this latest run of the Sims. It's been kind of interesting looking at the usage of the Rams, because there have been times where it's looked like Blake Corum has earned, something like a 45% split or something of the workload. And then other times it looks like it's the Kyren Williams show. And the most recent game, we kind of saw it as the Kyren Williams show. But so far in 2 games in the playoffs, 34 carries for Kyren Williams to 17 for Blake Corum. So Kyren doubling up Corum. Also 7 targets for Kyren to 2 for Blake Corum. Kyren running 37% to Corum's 21% of routes. So Kyren, the pretty clear lead back so far in the playoffs. Corum at 8.5 carries per game, 1 target per game so far in the playoffs. And then last week it looked even more split in Kyren's favor. 21 carries for Kyren to 6 for Blake Corum, 5 targets for Kyren to 0 for Blake Corum. I do think that it's at least worth noting that the snap share actually didn't change all that much. It was still 36.4% of snaps for Blake Corum in the divisional round to 64% for Kyren Williams. So that's not all that different from the game prior. So the snap share at least hasn't really changed. It was just the workload was much more in favor of Kyren. I don't know if that's a fluky thing or something we can expect to hold, if it's going to continue to be Kyren just dominating the usage here. I'm willing to bet against that, just because we have a larger sample of, being a little bit inconsistent how the usage goes, and Corum sometimes will kind of get rolling and they'll use him a bit more. It's still going to be, I would expect it to be, I should say, in Kyren's favor. But I think that there are scenarios where Corum gets up to 45% of the work, something like that. So Corum at 4% ownership still is very intriguing to me. I'm still going to be playing above weight for sure on Corum. Kyren 42%. I only got to 32%. I think I probably end up with a little bit more than this 32%. You can see here I'm getting to all of the Kenneth Walker right now. I might even out those splits a bit more and get to some more Kyren Williams instead. But Corum, the more interesting to me from a large field tournament standpoint. He's not somebody you're playing, obviously, in cash games. I don't think you really need to go there in smaller field tournaments. But in the largest field contest, just getting 4% ownership, again, I just think it's been kind of inconsistent how Sean McVay has been using Kyren Williams and Blake Corum. So I'll lean into that inconsistency. If Corum's only going to be 4% owned on a 2-game slate, and then obviously you always get the contingent upside, same thing with Jaleel McLaughlin. If anything happens to the starter, the backup is just going to look a lot better, going to get a ton more usage. So Corum, I think, has enough of a standalone role that at 4% ownership, I'm willing to be, triple the field, quadruple the field on Blake Corum, and then obviously he has the contingent upside as well. And part of what you like about Corum is also he actually does get some of the inside the 5 carries. Kyren Williams 54% over the last 5 games, actually the last 6 games. Blake Corum 38.5% of inside the 5 carries. So it is split in favor of Kyren Williams, but Blake Corum also can get those inside the 5 carries for the Rams. So a lot to like about Blake Corum at very low ownership. On the Patriots, we've got Ramondre Stevenson at 6,000 projected for 48% ownership. Trevion Henderson at 5,500 projected for 11% ownership. I got to 42% Ramondre, 11% of Trevion. So I'm right even with the field on Trevion Henderson, slightly under the field on Ramondre Stevenson. Again, this is all just because I'm getting to all of the Kenneth Walker, getting well over the field there, so getting under the field elsewhere. It is a tough matchup for the Patriots running backs. And as far as the usage goes, it has been a split, clearly in favor of Ramondre Stevenson, but a big enough split that both are viable. In the 2 playoff games, 26 carries for Ramondre Stevenson to 21 for Trevion Henderson. Also 8 targets for Ramondre Stevenson on 55% route participation, 3 targets for Trevion Henderson on 23% route participation. So Ramondre, pretty strong workload in these 2 games, 13 carries and 4 targets per game. According to offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels on the 22nd, he said Ramondre Stevenson's ability to block blitzes and protect the quarterback has allowed him to play a role as a pass catcher. He's got a broad route tree, really good hands, and a really good understanding of what to do to help the quarterback and be friendly to him. So the team clearly loves Ramondre. You see it in the usage, you see it in the way they talk about Ramondre Stevenson. So I do expect Ramondre Stevenson to continue to get the bulk of the work for the Patriots. And like I said, I'm getting to about even with the field at 42%. I'm happy with that exposure to Ramondre Stevenson. Trevion Henderson obviously doesn't get the same kind of workload that Ramondre Stevenson does, but he's such a strong breakaway runner. Any given game, you wouldn't be surprised to see Trevion Henderson break off for a 50-yard touchdown. So even though he's not getting that strong of workload and he is 5,500, he's the most expensive RB2 on the slate. At low ownership, I like Trevion Henderson quite a bit. And of course, he also has contingent upside like any of the other RB2s, but I think his standalone role is strong enough and his ability to just break off. He's kind of similar to Kenneth Walker with Zach Charbonnet there, where it's like he's not always getting the greatest workload, but he has that breakaway ability that any game that he can break a slate. And on a 2-gamer, just getting 11% ownership, given his breakaway speed, I like Trevion Henderson quite a bit at 11% ownership. I would expect to end up over the field on Trevion Henderson as well. Finally, we have the Seahawks. Kenneth Walker is 6,200, projected for 78% ownership. Velus Jones, and they also activated George Holani, the rookie, off of IR. He is also min priced at 4,000. Neither Velus Jones nor George Holani projected for much ownership. The reason they're both in play, in case you missed it, Zach Charbonnet out for the season. On January 22nd, offense coordinator Clint Kubiak was asked about the current depth chart behind Kenneth Walker. He said, between George Holani, Cam Akers, we've got guys that can play. I think it needs to be said just how important Zach Charbonnet has been to our team this year and how much we're going to miss him. When you think about what is a Seahawk, a guy that's smart, tough, and dependable, that's Zach Charbonnet. He's one of the most impressive individuals I've been around. A lot of our success has come because of his leadership this year. So Clint Kubiak asked about the depth chart behind Kenneth Walker, and he mentions the running backs, but then just goes into how much he loves Zach Charbonnet. Not really a ringing endorsement of the other running backs on the Seahawks. If I had to play one of these running backs behind Kenneth Walker, and I'm not sure if I will, I think it would be George Holani first for me, then Cam Akers. I think Velus Jones actually the running back I'd be least likely to play on the Seahawks, because we saw they used they used Velus Jones last week. That was when the game was out of hand. So you wouldn't expect them to use Velus Jones in a game that they are, still there's any kind of competitiveness to the game. So I think Velus Jones really just there for emergency situations. If the game gets out of hand, I think it's a lot more likely if they're going to work in another running back along with Kenneth Walker that it's either George Holani or Cam Akers. I guess I would list George Holani first just because he was the first to be mentioned by Clint Kubiak, but it's really a guessing game. It is certainly possible that they lean on the veteran Cam Akers if they need somebody to take a few carries instead of the rookie. So it's really just guessing, I think, behind Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker, of course, just 6,200 projected for 78% ownership. I got to 96% in my first run of The Sims, despite the fact that it is, again, a fairly tough matchup. Now, it is the best matchup for any running backs on the slate. The matchup for the Seattle running backs, still going to be a tough one with this Seahawks defense. So Kenneth Walker, I mean, the workload probably strong enough for Kenneth Walker to kind of outweigh anything else. I suspect I'm going to end up with less of Kenneth Walker than what the Sims are giving me, or I'm fairly certain I'm going to end up with less than 96% of Kenneth Walker, but can't really blame you if you do want to play all the Kenneth Walker. We saw last week with Zach Charbonnet going down early, it was just totally the Kenneth Walker show until the game got out of hand and they leaned on Velus Jones. Walker also ran 42% of routes, saw 3 targets in that game. So I do expect Walker to be very involved. I do think that he will end up being my highest owned running back by probably a pretty wide margin. But maybe I'll have 80 to 85% of Kenneth Walker instead of 96%, just because I'm not, even with a strong workload in a tough matchup, Kenneth Walker is a volatile enough running back that if he's going to get a ton of ownership, I just don't want to lock him into all of my lineups personally. If you're playing a 20 max and you want to play 100% Kenneth Walker, I've got no issue with that. I think that he is clearly the strongest running back play on the slate. In a 150 set, for me, I'm not going to be playing 100%. I'm not going to be playing over 90%. Again, I think it'd be totally reasonable if you want to, because he should have a strong workload. He is an electric running back. I think for me, there's enough of a downside here just because, I mean, there's obviously always injury risk, but because it is a tough matchup and it is Kenneth Walker, who just some games look like he's running backwards more often than he's running forward, I probably am going to be closer to 80% than 90%. So ultimately, I think we've basically got the exposure that I'm getting right now. This is probably about the order that I expect my exposure to come in at. I think, it's going to come in a little bit lower on Kenneth Walker. I'll push up my RJ Harvey exposure a little bit. Probably be about this for Ramondre Stevenson and Kyren Williams. I think this isn't far off from where I'd like to be. And then all three of Trevion Henderson, Julio McLaughlin, Blake Corum, push those up. So it's going to be Kenneth Walker. I'll get a little bit lighter than I have right now. And then move any exposure that I move away from Kenneth Walker probably goes to RJ Harvey, Trevion Henderson, Julio McLaughlin, and Blake Corum, all just a little bit more than I'm getting to right now, because I think, the field that's already playing them, none of them going completely overlooked, but I do like playing these lower owned, kind of cheaper running backs that I think have big upside on short slates like this. At wide receiver, I'm going to break this down team by team, but first I'm just going to go over the top wide receivers in order of projected ownership as of right now on Saturday. So right now we've got Jackson Smith and Jigba at 8,000 projected for 77% ownership. Puka Nacua 9,000 projected for 59%. Devonta Adams 6,000 projected for 43%. Cortland Sutton, 5,700 projected for 41%. Stephon Diggs, 5,800 projected for 39%. Cooper Kupp, 3,800 projected for 28%. Kayshon Boutte, 4,500 projected for 20%. Pat Bryant, 4,400 projected for 20%. Marvin Mims, 4,200 projected for 10%. Troy Franklin, 4,700 projected for 8.2%. Rashid Shaheed, 4,100 projected for 4%. Kyle Williams, 3,500 at 4%. Low Jordan Humphrey, 3,400 at 4%. Pop Douglas, 3,600 at 3%. Jordan Whittington, 3,100 at 3%. Konata Mumpfield at 3,200, 1.5%. And then nobody else getting to 1% ownership, but we do have some min prices here getting, between 0 and 1% in Efton Chisholm, Derek Young, Jake Bobo, and Xavier Smith. In terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position over the last 5 weeks, the Broncos are the only team with a arguably positive matchup. It's not even, it's a negative relative to a neutral matchup, but it is the 15th best matchup for wide receivers. The Rams have the 15th worst matchup for wide receivers. The Seahawks have the 9th worst matchup for wide receivers, and the Patriots have the 3rd worst matchup for wide receivers. So again, we will start with the Broncos, and it is a little bit of a mess because we don't know as of right now if Troy Franklin is going to play. He's questionable. Pat Bryant off the injury report, so Pat Bryant seemingly good to go for Sunday. I think the only real big question mark we have here is Troy Franklin, which is a fairly big question mark on the Broncos. We might have some value if Troy Franklin is out. Regardless, though, they're going to have Jarrett Stidham throwing the ball again. We don't know how that's going to affect things for the Broncos, if they're going to be a bit more run heavy. How much do we really want to be playing these wide receivers? As you may recall, I didn't get to a ton of Jarrett Stidham in my run of the Sims. And actually, I ran the Sims one more time. There was a little bit of a break in between the wide receiver section here and the previous sections. So I have run the Sims one more time. I actually got to even less of Jarrett Stidham in this run of the Sims. My exposures changed a little bit at quarterback, getting to more Drake May. Only got to 1% Jarrett Stidham. So keep that in mind when we're looking at the wide receivers. I didn't get to much of any of these Broncos receivers. Cortland Sutton, 5,700 projected for 41% ownership. I only got to 6%. Now, if we look at the most recent 6 games for the Broncos, Cortland Sutton has 52 targets on 84.3% route participation, clearly leads the team in any meaningful measure. So Cortland Sutton would be the top target here. Of course, Christian Gonzalez probably going to be on him a bit. It is worth noting that while Christian Gonzalez is projected to be on Cortland Sutton, this is not projected to be a shadow situation. So Cortland Sutton probably going to see a good amount of Christian Gonzalez, but not the entire game. Ultimately, yeah, I'm going to be underweight on Cortland Sutton if he comes in at 41% ownership. That's just too much, even for a clear top receiver on the team. With Jarrett Stidham throwing him the ball in a tough matchup, I'm not that excited to play a ton of Cortland Sutton. I'm also expecting to be pretty light on Jarrett Stidham. So I'll end up under the field, certainly on Cortland Sutton. I'll probably end up with more than the 6% that I have right now, but I'm certainly going to be underweight on Cortland Sutton. After Cortland Sutton, Pat Bryant would be the second target here for the Broncos. He is 4,400, cheaper than Troy Franklin, just a little bit more than Marvin Mims. And he's been the pretty clear wide receiver 2 in recent weeks for the Broncos. Pat Bryant projected for 20% ownership. Again, I only got to 1% in this run of the Sims. Same kind of thing as Courtland Sutton. I expect to be under the field. I don't expect to be under 1%. I expect to have more like, 10 to 15% Pat Bryant, probably the target here. Pat Bryant, as you can see here, missed weeks 15 and 17, so he's been a little bit banged up. And then, of course, in that first playoff game, he played the first drive, was targeted 3 times on that drive, was starting to have a really nice fantasy game, and then missed the rest of the game. So we haven't really seen Pat Bryant fully healthy in recent weeks at all for the Broncos, but he's still been the pretty clear wide receiver 2, targeted 20 times in his, targeted 18 times in his most recent 3 games. So 6 targets per game on 65.6% route participation. I believe that includes leaving the game early in some of these. I removed the most recent playoff game because, again, he was out after the very first series. But Pat Bryant, pretty clearly the wide receiver 2 on the on the Broncos in recent weeks. So he would be my next target after Courtland Sutton. I like the price on Pat Bryant, but still 20% ownership, not something that I am, overly enthusiastic about playing a ton. And then beyond those two, it gets kind of dicey. There's nobody that I'm really excited to play, especially if Troy Franklin is in, because Troy Franklin, 4,700, and as noted, Pat Bryant has just been getting more targets than Troy Franklin. Troy Franklin, 4 targets per game over his most recent 5 on 53% route participation, as Pat Bryant has kind of taken back, or shouldn't say taken back, but taken over that wide receiver 2 role for the Broncos. So now Troy Franklin, kind of the wide receiver 3 on the Broncos. We also have to consider, Jarrett Stidham throwing the ball. Maybe he has a backup connection with somebody. So I think if Troy Franklin is in, probably I wouldn't think that Jarrett Stidham has been, practicing a ton with any of these top 3. I don't see any clear backup connection that I would expect for these top 3. I think it gets a little bit more interesting if Troy Franklin is out. Now, in their most recent playoff game, we saw Lil Jordan Humphrey and Marvin Mims each ran 69.4% of routes. Marvin Mims targeted 8 times. Lil Jordan Humphrey targeted 5 times. That was with both Troy Franklin and Pat Bryant getting hurt inside the game. So both ended up running a lot more routes than expected in that game because we had 2 starting receivers injured for the Broncos. My expectation is if Troy Franklin misses the game, it would be more likely to be Marvin Mims getting more of the work rather than Lil Jordan Humphrey. Now, if we look at the route share report toward the end of the season, we had these 2 games that Pat Bryant missed. In both of those games, we saw Lil Jordan Humphrey see a big spike in terms of route participation, surrounded by a bunch of games, in the teens in terms of route participation. And then we saw again Lil Jordan Humphrey with the big spike with Pat Bryant out. I think that he's more of a Pat Bryant replacement than a Troy Franklin replacement because they both line up in the slot quite a bit. Again, we look at the most recent 6 games for the Broncos in terms of slot route participation. So we're just looking at kind of recent games. It's been Lil Jordan Humphrey has run 60% from the slot, Pat Bryant 60% from the slot. So I think that Lil Jordan Humphrey more likely to get in there with Pat Bryant being out rather than Troy Franklin being out. Troy Franklin only running 34% from the slot. I think that it's going to be Marvin Mims more likely to be more involved with Troy Franklin out, and he might actually have some of that backup connection with Jarrett Stidham, as he's been kind of the wide receiver for the Broncos. So I think that if Troy Franklin misses, there's some optimism for Marvin Mims. I also think, he's a little bit more likely to get some of that, short yardage stuff where they're just kind of getting the ball into his hands and hoping that he can make a play rather than making Jarrett Stidham throw the ball down the field. So I think if Troy Franklin ends up being out, I would have some interest in Marvin Mims. If Troy Franklin is in, I don't have a ton of interest there. He could still get some of that kind of gimmicky stuff, but I wouldn't expect him to have a huge role. I still think it would be Sutton, Bryant, and then Franklin as the top 3 wide receivers, but even Franklin running like 50% of the routes, and then Mims maybe 30%, and you can kind of make a case, but it's more of a tournament dart throw, anybody on the Broncos. Whereas if Troy Franklin is out, I think all of Sutton, Bryant, and then Mims to me would be the 3 that I would expect to run, over 60% of routes, potentially at least over 50% of routes. So very much in play for large fields. I don't think that I would have a ton of interest in Lil Jordan Humphrey. Now, again, I could be wrong about this. It's possible. None of them are running all of their routes from the slot. So Lil Jordan Humphrey still could also benefit from Troy Franklin being out. Maybe gets up to 40% route participation, something like that. So he would still be in play at 3,400 if Troy Franklin is out. If Troy Franklin is in, I don't really think I would consider Lil Jordan Humphrey very strongly. I just don't see a ton of upside there. Of course, he could score a random touchdown or something, but probably not going to see, more than a couple targets in that scenario. So it would be, clearly Cortland Sutton, the wide receiver 1. I'd say pretty clearly Pat Bryant, the wide receiver 2. And then depending on Troy Franklin's status, I would actually have more interest in a third wide receiver on the Broncos if Troy Franklin is out and we can play Marvin Mims. I would be interested there. If Troy Franklin is in, then it's kind of, a tiny bit of interest just because he's low owned and he should run some routes. I would want to have some exposure to Troy Franklin, but it is kind of hoping for a miracle more so than a player with a great workload. On the Rams, we've got Puka Nacua at 9,000 projected for 59% ownership. Devonta Adams at 6,000 projected for 43% ownership. You can see I got well over the field on Puka. I got to 75% exposure, 47% for Devonta Adams, so slightly over the field there. Those are the only Rams receivers I got to in my first run of the Sims. It's kind of tough to find a third or fourth receiver that you really love on the Rams. Looking at their recent game log, so I'll pull up, this is their most recent 7 games in total. It's Puka Nacua, 79% route participation, Devonta Adams, 73%. You drop all the way down to Konata Mumpfield, 43% route participation. That includes some games that Devonta Adams missed, and Konata Mumpfield was kind of thrown into the Devonta Adams-like kind of role. And then Xavier Smith down at 30%. So nobody really running a ton of routes from the wide receiver position. They've been running a lot more 2 and 3 tight end sets, especially now that they have Tyler Higbee back. They're just not using a third wide receiver all that often. And looking at the playoffs so far, so in their first game in the wild card round, it was Xavier Smith ran 47% of routes. This is with Jordan Whittington out for this game. Xavier Smith ran 47%, Tutu Atwell 30%, Konata Mumpfield 14%. And then in the most recent game, it was Konata Mumpfield up from 14% to 52% route participation, even with Jordan Whittington back. Whittington ran 50% of routes. Tyler Higbee, we saw, drop down quite a bit in that game. So kind of hard to get a read on what they're trying to do. Is it going to be Jordan Whittington as a wide receiver 3? Is Konata Mumpfield? Is this real? Is he going to hold up here? Are they going to go back to more, 3 tight end sets? So I don't really know what to make of these, tertiary receivers on the Rams. I don't have a really strong preference among them. I think the fact that Xavier Smith dropped down to 4% in this game, I'm probably not going to be playing Xavier Smith. I think I would be most likely to play Jordan Whittington of the receivers outside of Puka Nacua and Devonta Adams, followed by Konata Mumpfield. But I don't have a ton of interest in any of them. Again, in that game, 3 targets for Mumpfield, 2 for Whittington. I'd be more likely to just play the tight ends than the tertiary receivers. And looking at the game prior to that, it was Mumpfield was targeted once. None of the other receivers saw a target. So I don't have a lot of interest in the Rams outside of Puka Nacua and Devonta Adams. I've got a lot of interest, of course, in Puka Nacua and Devonta Adams. I'm over the field on Matthew Stafford. My expectation is that I'm going to be, of course, playing a ton of Puka Nacua and Devonta Adams. But I don't have a lot of interest outside of those two. If you want to play a little bit, you're getting them at low ownership. Whittington 3%, Mumpfield 1.5%, Xavier Smith 0.1. I probably wouldn't play Xavier Smith, but if you want to play Whittington or Mumpfield at low ownership, just take a dart throw on one of them, scoring a touchdown on a 2-game slate. That is obviously totally fine to do. Again, I think my preference would be Whittington, although he is getting double the ownership. It's close. They're pretty close. I don't think that I would have more than 5-6% of either of them. I think that's totally reasonable if you're playing a 20 lineup set. You want to play one or two of Whittington or Mumpfield. That's fine. If you're playing 5% in 150 set, I think that's reasonable. I don't think that I have any great reason to play a ton more than that because we have some other pretty strong values that are actually going to have better roles. So totally fine, but not that interested. Whereas Puka Nacua and Devonta Adams, 2 of the best roles of any wide receiver in the playoffs. We've seen in the 2 playoff games. So in the wild card round, we saw 16 targets for Puka Nacua, 13 for Devonta Adams. Neither of them, Devonta Adams has not done a ton with his targets. Puka Nacua, I guess, has done a little bit more with his. He did have 111 yards in that first game. Adams had 72 on his 13 targets. And then in the most recent game, we saw 10 targets for Nacua, 6 for Davante Adams. So big drop down, but there's still, reasonable involvement in a game that didn't quite go the way they wanted it to. So ultimately, I think with the workloads for Puka Nacua and Davante Adams, I am going to have a lot of interest in both of them. I actually expect that I will be more above the field on Davante Adams than I am right now, because I think that he is more likely than maybe anyone on the slate to score, any wide receiver on the slate, I should say, to score multiple touchdowns. I guess you could argue JSN might be more likely than Davante Adams, but he's probably more likely than Puka Nacua to get there on touchdowns, whereas Nacua, of course, more likely to get there on receptions. But at 6,000, Davante Adams and 43% ownership, I have a lot of interest. I expect I will be more over the field than I am as of right now. And Puka Nacua, I'm fine with 75%. Not sure if I'll be quite that high. It is a really tough matchup with the Seahawks, but I do anticipate being over the field if he's at 59%. On the Patriots, things get a little bit messy with the return of Mac Hollins activated to the active roster today. So we can expect Mac Hollins to probably be active on game day. That's really going to throw a wrench into the wide receivers on the Patriots. Let's take a look at the route share report so we can see kind of what they were doing with Mac Hollins active. And he was active up until week 17. So we saw Mac Hollins with a pretty healthy workload. He was arguably the wide receiver 2 on the Patriots. I don't know how you really want to argue it with Mac Hollins, but he clearly had a pretty strong role from week 10 onward. Now, Booty was out for a couple games, so we have a 4-game sample size here from weeks 12 through week 16, where all of Kayshon Boutte, Stephon Diggs, Mac Hollins, Pop Douglas, Kyle Williams, all were active. So we can take a look at that little sample from week 12 through 16 to kind of see what the Patriots' usage looked like. And of course, there was a bye in there, but in that 4-week sample, it was, in terms of route participation, it was Kayshon Boutte leading with 75.5% of routes, followed by Mac Hollins actually at 70.3%, Stephon Diggs down at 62.6%, and then a big drop down, Pop Douglas at 26%, Kyle Williams at 17%. In terms of targets over that 4-game stretch, it was Mac Hollins leading with 27 targets, Stephon Diggs at 20, Kayshon Boutte at 11, Pop Douglas at 6, Kyle Williams at 5. The tough thing to know is how involved is Mac Hollins going to be in his return? Is it going to take multiple games? Is it going to be full go this week? Is he going to wait and be full go in the Super Bowl? He was dealing with an abdomen issue. I would expect them to probably bring him in slowly, and maybe not slowly, but not give him a full workload in his first game. But honestly, I don't really know what to expect from Mac Hollins in this first game, how much we can actually expect him to play. We know Mac Hollins is going to want to show up and play as much as possible right away. He is certainly somebody who prides himself on being a warrior, on being willing to put his body through it. So I would expect Mac Hollins to be fighting for as much usage as possible in his first game back. I'm not sure if Mike Vrabel is going to give it to him, but that is something that we need to consider: is how much is Mac Hollins going to play? Who is he going to eat into in his return here? So again, looking at the games with Mac Hollins, weeks 12 through 16, it was Kayshon Boutte, Hollins, and then Diggs in terms of route participation. And then the games following that, so these are games without, the most recent 4 games without Mac Hollins, it's been Diggs leading in route participation, followed by Kayshon Boutte, Kyle Williams up to 40%, and then Pop Douglas about up to 40% also. I think that most likely Kyle Williams is going to largely go away with Mac Hollins back. Again, he was at 17% route participation. It makes sense because Mac Hollins typically lines up out wide, as does Kyle Williams. You saw the big jump for Kyle Williams in the first game without Mac Hollins at 82% route participation. That was also, of course, without Kayshon Boutte, but I think Kyle Williams is going to be cut out pretty significantly with Mac Hollins back. Pop Douglas maybe loses a little bit of work as well. Again, he was only up at 40% route participation, and Pop Douglas primarily lines up in the slot. 82.4% of his routes in the last 4 weeks in the slot, whereas Mac Hollins primarily out wide. So I think that it mostly hurts Kyle Williams, probably has, a little bit of a cascading effect, hurts Pop Douglas a little bit, maybe even Boutte and Diggs a little bit. But overall, I'd say we can expect Diggs or Boutte, whoever you want to call the wide receiver one on the Patriots, I think kind of maintain pretty strong roles. And then I think Mac Hollins could slot right into that wide receiver 3 role in his first game back. If he's, returns a little bit slower, I think Pop Douglas has still had a strong enough role that we can consider Pop Douglas. In the 2 playoff games, we do have Pop Douglas at 48% route participation, Kyle Williams at 30%. Maybe Pop Douglas, retains 40 plus percent route participation with Mac Hollins back, while Mac Hollins cuts into Kyle Williams. But it's kind of a big unknown with Mac Hollins. Overall, I think, we'll start, let's look at what I'm getting right now. So Diggs, 5,800 projected for 39% ownership. I'm getting to 65%. Again, I'm getting to a lot of Drake May. The expectation at fantasy points is that it's actually going to be Pat Surtain on Kayshon Boutte. So this is a little bit different than what I had initially thought it was going to be, but it makes sense. We have Kayshon Boutte lining up out wide. We're going to have Pat Surtain, and he has actually been leading in terms of first reads in recent weeks. Looking at just the playoff weeks, Kayshon Boutte 24.3% first read target share in these 2 playoff games. Stephon Diggs at 21.6%. So Boutte very involved in a lot of metrics. Looks like he's actually the wide receiver 1 rather than Diggs, although Diggs running more routes. Diggs has actually been targeted 11 times to Kayshon Boutte's 9. But again, Boutte more first read targets. Pick your choice who you think is the wide receiver 1 on the Patriots. But Boutte looking like he might actually get that Patrick Surtain shadow coverage, which would benefit Stephon Diggs. Now, Diggs at 5,800, I'm getting to 65%. I would anticipate that I'm going to get less than this ultimately and take my shots on Boutte and then Mac Hollins once we have Hollins here. Hollins is at 3,900. He's not currently in the Sims. They are adding him right now. He will be in here. You can obviously play him on game day. But Hollins at 3,900, I would anticipate I'm actually going to get a fair amount. I think that he's probably going to be, projected for the 3rd highest target share behind Diggs and Boutte. Who knows? Maybe we even project him higher because he had been his role prior to being hurt. Hollins was again leading the team in targets in that most recent 4 games with 27 targets. Really a target. I mean, he was looking like a fantasy breakout star even at his age. Hollins was looking great. So at 3,900, Hollins is going to be somebody that I have a lot of interest in. Ultimately, if I had to guess like the target pecking order on the Patriots just among wide receivers, it would probably be Diggs number 1, followed by Boutte and then Hollins. But even that, I'm not even sure if we're going to see Pat Surtain on Boutte and given Hollins's target participation in his most recent games, it could actually be Hollins ahead of Boutte in the pecking order. Really just depends on how much we expect him to see the field in his first game back, how much they're going to bring him along slowly. It's the playoffs. They might just put him right back in there. So it could actually be Hollins number 2. But I have a fair amount of interest in both Boutte and Hollins, again, because Boutte's been leading in that first read target share. So I think ultimately I'm going to end up pretty significantly lower than this 65% on Diggs, maybe closer to the 39% projected ownership. I suspect I'll be closer to this 20% for Boutte, and then I think I'll be getting a fair amount of Mac Hollins at 3,900 also. Pop Douglas, I would expect my exposure here to decrease. Running primarily out of the slot, I do expect him to retain some of his workload, but I don't think I'm going to be getting to 31% Pop Douglas as I would expect him to be the wide receiver 4 with Mac Hollins back. And Kyle Williams, I don't think I'm going to get there much, if at all. I think he's playable on a 2-game slate. He's obviously capable of just having one long splash play for a touchdown and that being enough at 3,500 for the 2-game slate. I just don't think that he is a big priority for me relative to some other values, especially with Mac Hollins being 3,900. Of course, a lot is going to depend on how much ownership does Mac Hollins end up getting. Also, if he ends up getting a ton of ownership, that'll be some reason to not play him. As of right now, again, not in the sim, so we don't know what the projected ownership is for Mac Hollins. Roto Grinders has it at 10% projected ownership for Mac Hollins. If he comes in at 10%, I think that's a fantastic play, just given the likelihood that he does come back and sees something close to the role that he had, which I think it's more likely than not that he's going to be a somewhat reduced role, but there's some possibility he just steps right back into the role that he had. He's obviously healthy enough to be playing. So at 10% ownership, I would have a fair amount of interest in Mac Hollins. I think I'd be maybe double, triple the field on Mac Hollins if he comes in this low. Finally, the Seahawks, probably the easiest team to break down at wide receiver. We've got JSN, 8,000 projected for 77% ownership. Rashid Shaheed, 4,100 projected for 4%. Cooper Kupp, 3,800 projected for 28%. Using these projected ownership numbers, I got a little bit under the field, 63% JSN. Got to 48% Rashid Shaheed at 4% projected ownership. I'd be a little surprised to see Rashid Shaheed come in this low, so I don't anticipate actually getting to 48%. I think I prefer Mac Hollins in a vacuum. If the ownership is anywhere close to Rashid Shaheed, I'd rather play Mac Hollins and then Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp at 3,800 projected for 28% ownership. I only got to 3%. This seems pretty extreme in the projected ownership. I think it's probably a little bit closer than this, and my the amount that I get also going to be a bit closer. But JSN, a pretty obviously strong play. Cooper Kupp at 3,800. Again, I prefer Mac Hollins over either Cooper Kupp or Rashid Shaheed, but just looking at the usage, so in their most recent 5 games, we have 44 targets for JSN, awesome workload, 22 for Cooper Kupp, so over 4.5 targets per game, or almost 4.5 targets per game for Cooper Kupp. Then we've got Rashid Shaheed, just 12 targets. So Cooper Kupp, 10 more targets than Rashid Shaheed in their most recent 5 games. I will say Rashid Shaheed, in their one playoff game, they gave him a couple rushes. They were kind of finding interesting ways to use him. He had the kick return for a touchdown. There are some positives to Rashid Shaheed, but it is Cooper Kupp is running more routes than Shaheed, being targeted more than Shaheed in the divisional round. So this is your only playoff game. We saw actually Cooper Kupp led the team with 5 targets, 4 for JSN, Rashid Shaheed at 2. So Cooper Kupp kind of has a slightly better role than Rashid Shaheed. Obviously, we don't expect this to hold with JSN only getting 4 targets. Cooper Kupp does have a slightly better role than Rashid Shaheed. Ultimately, if these are the ownership numbers, I think I'll probably be under 77% on JSN. I would be over 4% on Rashid Shaheed. I'm not going to play 48%. It might be more like 12 to 15%, something like that seems reasonable for Shaheed. He does have obviously the big play upside that you love, but I don't need to be taking this kind of a stand on Rashid Shaheed. I would assume that after Mac Hollins is added to the Sims are not going to be giving you a ton this much Rashid Shaheed. And then Cooper Kupp, 28%, a little bit too much ownership, but honestly, I'd be kind of fine with 28%. Like the Sims are giving me 3%. I'd be wanting to be well over that number. I want to have at least like 15%, I think, of Cooper Kupp. He's just too cheap given his role. Of course, revenge game narrative. Everybody wants the Cooper Kupp revenge on the Rams, but really just the role is pretty strong for Cooper Kupp. It's held steady in their playoff game. So I think he is a fairly strong play at 3,800. But again, I prefer Mac Hollins at 3,900 over either of the secondary receivers on the Seahawks. So just a quick hitter overview of my thoughts at wide receiver. Puka Nacua at 59% ownership. I would expect to be slightly over the field there, maybe not quite at the 75% I'm getting right now. Stephon Diggs at 39% ownership. I would expect to be closer to the field. The Sims are giving me a lot more than the field. I think I'm going to be closer to the field than that, a lot less than the Sims are giving me right now, with the return of Mac Hollins kind of eating into his production a little bit. JSN, 77% ownership. I, again, anticipate being below the field on JSN. Certainly not going to be getting to 48% Rashid Shaheed if he gets 4%. If he gets 4% ownership, it makes sense to be over the field, but I'd be more likely in that like 12 to 15% range as opposed to 48%, just really extreme for Rashid Shaheed given his wide range of outcomes. Devontae Adams, I love here, so I will be over the field on Devontae Adams at 43%. I'll probably have more than the 47% that I'm getting right now. After that group, I would say, Kayshon Boutte, I probably want to have closer to the 20% that I'm getting right now. I don't think I'm going to have that much of Pop Douglas with Mac Hollins returning. I'll have a little bit. He is, again, citing Jake Kirby, he is the man beater for the for the Patriots, and we're expecting the Seahawks to play the Broncos to play a fair amount of man defense. So there's some positives there for Pop Douglas, but with Matt Collins returning, I'm not sure that the workload is strong enough to want to play a ton. If he gets 3% ownership, I'll probably be above the field there, but I'm not going to be playing 31% as I'm getting right here. Again, probably when all is said and done, Matt Collins going to break above this line. You can see a big breakdown from getting 31% Pop Douglas and then nobody else getting to a ton. I'd be closer to this, the 25% range, maybe 30% of Matt Collins. If he gets 10% or lower ownership, he would be the one that I'm kind of pushing up here. Keishon Boutte I do like a bit, but he's getting 20% ownership. Cortland Sutton, again, I expect to be under the field, probably higher than 6%. Honestly, maybe not that much, maybe more like 15%. I like Cooper Kupp a bit, probably closer to the field than I'm getting right now, but I don't think I'll quite get to this 28%. Mims, I'm actually going to like quite a bit if Troy Franklin is out. If Troy Franklin is in, it's tough to prioritize Mims. I do like Pat Bryant better than this 1% I'm getting, maybe less, certainly less than the 20% he's projected for. Probably not going to play much of Kyle Williams. Troy Franklin, even if he's in, not going to be a huge priority. Maybe I get to a little bit under this 8%. Don't really have any other strong players that I really like here outside of that group. Whittington, Mumfield, Jordan Humphrey, none of them are big priorities. Humphrey you can consider if Troy Franklin is out. If Troy Franklin is in, he's kind of a long shot. And then again, of the Rams, probably Whittington over Mumfield, but I don't have a real strong take on the Rams, especially with Whittington getting more ownership than Mumfield. At tight end, in order of projected ownership, we have Hunter Henry at 4,800 projected for 49% ownership. AJ Barner, 4,000 projected for 28%. Evan Ingram, 3,300 projected for 17%. Colby Parkinson, 3,500 projected for 14%. Austin Hooper, 2,500 for 7%. Higbee at 3,000 for 6%. Eric Saubert at 2,500 projected for 4.6%. Terrence Ferguson, 2,700, 3%. Adam Troutman, 2,500, 2.8%. Nate Adkins, Davis Allen, Jack Westover all getting 1% or less. And then, of course, Elijah Arroyo returns for the Seahawks. I'm not sure that he's really playable, though. We will get into this team by team, but first we'll look at the schedule-adjusted fantasy points allowed to the tight end position over the most recent 5 weeks. The Seahawks have the 14th best matchup for tight ends. The Patriots have the 16th worst matchup for tight ends. The Broncos have the 8th worst matchup for tight ends, and then the Rams have the 6th worst matchup for tight ends. Hunter Henry, again, 4,800 projected for 49% ownership. I got to 31%. I don't think Matt Collins' return really going to cut into Hunter Henry. Again, looking at the most recent 4 games where they're both active. Hunter Henry was second on the team with 26 targets. So even with Matt Collins there, Henry getting a fair amount of work. In 2 playoff games, he has 7 targets on 78% route participation. So pretty strong usage for Hunter Henry. While we're looking at the Patriots, Austin Hooper also getting some ownership, 2,500 projected for 7% ownership over that recent stretch with Matt Collins. There we saw Austin Hooper 7 targets in those 4 games on 27% route participation. In the playoffs so far, Austin Hooper 3 targets in 2 games on 30% route participation. So not like a great role, but if you just get a random touchdown for one of these tight ends that's not getting a ton of ownership, that can be a big leg up on a 2-game slate, because it's very possible that we don't get more than 7-8 fantasy points from any tight end on this slate. So if you can get those 7 or 8 and that leads the slate at a low price tag and low ownership, that can be pretty powerful. So Hooper looks fine at 7% ownership. Henry I think makes sense as being the tight end that's going to get the most ownership here. Just has the clear best role of any tight end here. AJ Barner over the last 5 games, just 17 targets. So, a better role than most of the tight ends on this slate, but that's because we don't have that great of a tight end slate. Just over 3 targets per game over that recent 5-game stretch, 69% route participation. In the most recent playoff game, he actually wasn't targeted, but he did run 79% of routes. So an increase in route participation, no targets in that game. I'm not reading too much into the targets though, because again, JSN was only targeted 4 times in that game. They just were not throwing the ball at all because they didn't need to against San Francisco. So I'm not too worried about the targets in that game. I think this is kind of a bloop. I would expect if they start throwing the ball more, which who knows if they're actually going to. But if they do, certainly AJ Barner will benefit. But again, only 3 or 4 targets per game in recent weeks, even when they have been throwing the ball a little bit more. Eric Saubert, not somebody who gets targeted a ton. I would say a slightly worse play than Austin Hooper. He will run more routes than Austin Hooper, most likely, but just not much of a target earner. Again, in their most recent 5 games, Eric Saubert just 4 targets, so under 1 target per game. 26.4% route participation overall. He did run 42% of the routes in that playoff game, but wasn't targeted in the game. So, we could see a target or 2 for Eric Saubert, hope for a touchdown, but similar to Austin Hooper, that's kind of all you're really hoping for. You're not going to get their own volume. You need a touchdown for it to pay off. Certainly could happen, but we're kind of wish casting a little bit. I do also want to look at inside the 20 and end zone targets for tight ends. I always think that's where most tight ends get their value, is as end zone threats. Hunter Henry has 5 inside the 20 targets over the last 6 games and 1 end zone target. So that's where you get some of the value for Hunter Henry. Austin Hooper actually 2 inside the 20 and 2 end zone targets, more end zone targets than Hunter Henry over that span in 6 games. So pretty good usage in the red zone for the Patriots. As far as the Seahawks go, AJ Barner 3 inside the 20, 1 end zone target over that span. We actually have 2 inside the 20 targets for Eric Saubert. I think he was only targeted 4 times in that span, so 2 of them inside the 20. Certainly could get a touchdown there out of Eric Saubert. On the Broncos, inside the 20, we have Evan Ingram, 3 targets, 1 end zone target. Adam Troutman, none. None of the other receivers seem to have seen any inside the 20 targets either. So really just Evan Ingram getting anything inside the 20 or in the end zone. Evan Ingram, looking at him more broadly, 3,300 projected for 17% ownership. I got to 7%. Not a great roll. I probably want more than this 7% though. We do have the, again, Stidham coming in. Who knows who he's going to be targeting here, and it's probably not going to be Evan Ingram out of nowhere, but you never know. Sometimes you do see backup quarterbacks come in and target the tight end more. I think that has been sort of disproven as a universal thing, but certainly something that can happen with some backup quarterbacks. So Ingram at 3,300, 17% projected ownership, getting some of those looks inside the 20-yard line, I think is a fine play. I don't really think I need more than this 17%, but I have no issue if you want to get there. I'm probably not getting to any of the other Broncos tight ends. You could make the argument of the backup quarterback, backup tight end connection. We haven't really seen enough out of the other tight ends outside of Evan Ingram. Just looking at, again, the most recent 5 games, we've seen Troutman, 7 targets. I take it back. Troutman, 7 targets in 5 games, and his price is 2,500. He actually looks better than I realized, because he's being targeted more than once per game. That's more than Eric Saubert. He's getting lower ownership and might have kind of that backup tight end connection. So I don't hate it. I think Troutman in play more so for me than Nate Adkins, I would say. Adkins just 2 targets in 4 games on 10% route participation. Kind of a tough sell, but Troutman, I think that's actually decent usage for a backup tight end. And again, you get one touchdown out of Troutman, suddenly you're cooking. And then finally, the Rams are sort of an interesting, sort of a tough one, because we had Tyler Higbee come back after missing several weeks. He came back. He's played both of the playoff games, but didn't play much in the most recent game. We saw him come back. First, Higbee's playing, and then we saw Terrence Ferguson come back for the most recent game and seem to supplant Tyler Higbee as the tight end 2 on the Rams. It's kind of a mess, but Colby Parkinson appears to be the pretty clear tight end 1 on the Rams. He's 3,500 projected for 14% ownership. I got to 18% of Colby Parkinson. Again, I pulled up these are just the 2 playoff games. So we had 1 game with Higbee and no Ferguson, and then Ferguson comes back. But overall, in these 2 playoff games, Colby Parkinson, 48% route participation, 10 targets. Pretty strong usage for Colby Parkinson, 3rd on the team in targets. Higbee behind him, but he saw more usage in that first game, and then we saw the route participation drop down when Terrence Ferguson came back, and Ferguson ran 37% of routes, supplanted Higbee as that tight end too. So I think my order of interest, and of course Ferguson on the season at least, the ADOT has been a lot better. Let's see, yeah, Ferguson still 16.4 ADOT, 15.6 for Higbee. Colby Parkinson kind of a short ADOT here. But that's kind of been, Ferguson's been sort of a downfield threat. So we see, I would say my order of how I would, rank them as far as usage, it would be Colby Parkinson number 1, Ferguson number 2, Higbee 3 seems to be what the usage will look like. So Ferguson at 2,700, getting just 3% projected ownership. I have kind of a lot of interest there, especially as a downfield threat. I'll have at least double-digit exposure to Ferguson. Higbee, it's kind of, with the decrease in usage in that most recent game, and I think I'll pull up just the most recent game here for the Rams so we can take a look at what I'm talking about here with Higbee kind of losing his role. So in that most recent game for Higbee, it was just down to 17% route participation. Did still see 2 targets on that 17%, but Ferguson 5 targets on 37%. So yeah, I think this is kind of the my expectation would be that it's closer to this with all of them back. It kind of seems like Higbee has lost a lot of his role. So I think I think Parkinson looks like an objectively strong play. If he gets 14% ownership, I certainly want to be above that. But I think Ferguson would be the one that I'm most over the field on if he only gets 3% ownership at 2,700. Higbee, take it or leave it. I think 6% ownership, totally fine. Obviously, could score a touchdown, pay it off, but I don't think I need much more than the field on Higbee. And then I don't really think you need to get to Davis Allen as the tight end 4. Again, looking at that most recent game to Davis Allen, he 0 targets on, just ran 1 route in the game. I don't think you need to get to the tight end 4 here. So yeah, some interest in Parkinson, will be over the field at 14%. A lot of interest in Ferguson at 3%. And then Higbee, I think, is fine. Davis Allen is a pass for me. Defense, I think I'm actually going to change what the Sims are giving me pretty drastically. The Sims are giving me, and you might just want to stick with what the Sims are doing. The Sims are projecting the Broncos for 31% ownership, getting to 58%. So they have, even with the Broncos being the highest projected ownership, the Sims are just jamming them, getting to 58% there. The Patriots at 3,500, 28% projected ownership, I'm getting to 17%. Of course, the Patriots facing Jarrett Stidham would be the reason to kind of like the Patriots. The Broncos are the cheapest defense. Part of the appeal there. The Patriots getting the backup quarterback coming in has some appeal as well, although the game is in Denver. Then you've got the Seahawks, 3,300 projected for 21% ownership. I'm only getting to 11%. And then the Rams, finally, 2,800 at 20% ownership. I'm getting to 14%. So what I think I would do, I think I have a lot of interest in the Rams. Again, I am a biased Vikings fan. I saw Sam Darnold at his worst when it mattered the most last year. I can't get that out of my head. I still think that is well within the range of outcomes. So I have interest in the Rams under the what if Sam Darnold starts seeing ghosts again kind of theory. They have a really strong defense. It is a high pressure atmosphere. No Zach Charbonnet, who is a great pass blocker. So I think losing Zach Charbonnet hurts from a blocking standpoint. So I think that the Rams are pretty intriguing. Now, the game is in Seattle. I'd obviously like it better for the Rams if it were in Los Angeles. But I think I'll be above the field if 20% is what the field gets to of the Rams. The Seahawks obviously have a great defense. They have a tougher matchup with Matthew Stafford. I don't think I'll get to just 11%, though. I think I'll push that up. So generally what I'd say I'm going to do is I'll probably end up under the field on the Broncos, even though they are the cheapest and they obviously have a great defense. I think it's a tough spot against Drake May. So I suspect I'll end up actually under the field on the Broncos. This is completely inversing what the Sims are giving me. So if you want to just play the Sims game, the Sims love the Broncos. I love them less. I kind of prefer pushing up all of the other 3 defenses pretty significantly, enough that I'll be under the field on the Broncos. I'll take shots on the Patriots, probably be slightly over the field on 28%. But I think my biggest stand will probably be on the Rams defense against Sam Darnold. I'll probably be pretty significantly over this 20% projected ownership. All right, that's all I have for this video. Thanks for checking it out. Thanks for liking the video if you haven't already done so. I hope we win some money this weekend. Please let me know if you do win some money. Love to hear from you. Again, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you're interested in checking out the Flannelverse Discord, it's free to join. There's a link in the description of this video if you want to check it out. If you want to check out Run the Sims, you can use promo code Neil to get 50% off your first payment on any NFL product. I do believe it's going to be free for the Super Bowl. Just heard rumblings that Run the Sims might be free for the Super Bowl, so you could wait, check it out for the Super Bowl for the Showdown slate. If you want to do it for a multi-game slate, though, now's the time. All right, that's going to do it. Thanks everybody for checking out this video. Good luck on Sunday. Looking forward to hearing from you.